The warriors who built the greatest hidden fortunes in history all looked poor on purpose. Not because they were humble, not because they had no choice, because they understood something about power that the modern world has completely buried under advertising, social media, and the collective hallucination that your net worth belongs on display. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why looking wealthy is one of the most expensive decisions a person can make, and why the most dangerous people in any room are always the ones nobody notices. Here is what nobody is saying out loud. Society does not actually reward the wealthy. It rewards whoever looks wealthy the most convincingly. And the cost of maintaining that convincing performance is something most people never sit down and calculate honestly. Think about the world you were raised in. From the moment you could understand advertising, and that starts younger than most parents realize, the message was always a variation of the same thing. Here is a product, and here is the version of yourself you become once you own it. The shoes that give you confidence, the car that signals you belong somewhere better, the watch that tells everyone in the meeting what tax bracket you occupy. None of that messaging was designed to make you rich. It was engineered to keep you spending. Every scroll, every billboard, every influencer flashing what is usually a rented lifestyle is one more node in a system whose entire purpose is to convert your actual capital into the performance of having capital. And the uncomfortable part is that it works. Not on careless people, but on smart, ambitious, hardworking people who simply never stop to ask who built this system and whose interests it actually serves. Someone who understands Bushido at a real level, not the t-shirt version, the actual warrior philosophy, sees that machine for what it is. Not an opportunity, a trap with a very expensive entrance fee. A final revelation is waiting at the end of this, one that reframes everything that comes before it. Picture the moment. You just got the biggest payment of your career. A deal closed, a bonus landed, a year of real work finally converted into real numbers. The natural instinct in that moment is to let it show. Upgrade something visible. Tell the story with a purchase. Post something that lets the right people know the season has changed. That instinct is understandable. It is also where most wealth-building stories quietly end. There is something ancient warriors grasped about visibility that modern financial culture has spent decades trying to make you forget. The moment you display your treasury, you have already surrendered your most important advantage, the fact that no one knew what you had. You have just announced your coordinates, and once the coordinates are known, the threats follow. Tax structures tighten around visible success. Your social circle expands, but not with people who care about you. With people who care about proximity to what you have. Suddenly there are cousins you forgot existed. Colleagues who were never particularly warm start treating you like someone worth knowing. The golden armor is real, and it attracts real arrows. This dynamic is not abstract. In feudal Japan, any merchant who made their prosperity too visible invited immediate extraction. From local lords, from administrators, from rivals who had no legal obstacle and no moral hesitation. The modern version is less dramatic, but equally systematic. Lifestyle inflation, social obligation, the psychological pressure to maintain a standard once it has been established publicly. These are the arrows that find the golden armor. So what actually works instead? Strategic invisibility, which is not poverty and is not self-denial. It is the deliberate choice to keep your financial position unmapped. The warrior who moves through the world looking ordinary is the warrior the world never bothers preparing to fight. Here is where it gets more uncomfortable. The illusion of status is not something forced on you from outside. It is a choice made fresh every day, sometimes multiple times a day. When you buy something primarily because of how it registers with people you probably do not even like, you are making that choice. When two people who are both carrying debt smile at each other's new purchases, they are giving each other permission to keep losing. The samurai acquired for function. If it served no purpose in the actual mission, it did not come home with him. Everything else was weight. And the deepest cut of all, the people whose approval you are spending real money to earn are not actually thinking about you. They are thinking about their own performance, about what you think of them. You are two people burning actual resources to impress each other in real time, and neither of you is getting richer from the transaction. If that just landed somewhere real for you, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from right now. Warriors from every country are sitting with this same realization today. In 17th century Japan, there was a swordsman named Yagyu Munenori, swordmaster to the Tokugawa shogunate, and arguably the most strategically sophisticated martial mind of his era. He was not famous for his possessions. He held no reputation built on display. What made him genuinely terrifying was a different kind of mastery entirely. The ability to perceive the structure of a situation before anyone else in the room had finished reading it. To understand the invisible architecture of power before a single blade moved. That is what Miyamoto Musashi was pointing at in the Book of Five Rings when he wrote something that rarely makes it onto motivational pages. Perceive and know what cannot be seen with the eyes. And in a separate passage that financial strategists should have tattooed somewhere they can read it daily. There is timing in the way of the merchant, in the rise and fall of capital. All things entail rising and falling timing. Musashi was not writing poetry. He was writing operational doctrine. The warrior who has developed that quality of perception understands something about capital that most investors never reach. That the most powerful financial position is the one nobody else can see or account for, not the asset you posted about. The reserve that has been growing for 4 years without a single person in your social circle knowing it exists. That kind of capital sits outside the reach of anyone who might otherwise try to use your own success as a negotiating point against you, because they simply do not know it is there. It grows the way roots grow under frozen ground. Absolutely nothing visible on the surface, and genuinely catastrophic structural strength developing underneath. If this is beginning to sound like your own story, like something you have been feeling but could not quite name, like the video if the wisdom is hitting right. Because the next layer is where the principle becomes a way of living. Most people have heard of wabi-sabi. They associate it with bare concrete apartments and expensive Japanese ceramics that look deliberately cracked. That is the aesthetic version, and it largely misses the point. The original philosophical weight of wabi-sabi was far more challenging than interior design. It is the recognition that incompleteness is not a problem to be solved. That what you have, stripped of performance and decoration, is genuinely sufficient, not because you have given up, but because you have developed the internal stability to stop needing external confirmation that you are okay. The ego wants the room to acknowledge it. The warrior has already moved on to the next position. Those two orientations produce completely different financial lives over a decade. The practical implication of wabi-sabi in a financial context is this. A warrior who has genuinely internalized that principle becomes almost impossible to manipulate through status. You cannot threaten someone with social exclusion when they have already made peace with simplicity. The trap only works on people who are afraid of what they would lose. Remove the fear and the trap loses its teeth entirely. This is the invisible treasury principle in its purest form. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who unified Japan and founded the Edo shogunate after decades of civil war, spent a significant portion of his strategic career appearing weaker than he actually was. He outlived 3 generations of rivals not primarily because he was the most fearsome fighter on an open battlefield, but because his enemies consistently underestimated what he had in reserve. They miscalculated because they could not see his actual position. An enemy who does not know where you are cannot plan for what you will do next. That is not luck. That is deliberate construction. Every month, capital moves through your hands. And at some point in that monthly cycle, a decision gets made, often without much conscious deliberation, about whether that capital is going toward an actual position or toward the maintenance of how your position appears to others. Ego spending is not always the obvious luxury purchase. Sometimes it is the restaurant chosen for the right address rather than the right food. The brand on the shirt worn to a meeting where the shirt is genuinely irrelevant to the outcome. The apartment in the district that absorbs 40% of income primarily because it confirms a story about who you are to people who will never know your actual financial situation anyway. All of that qualifies. Any purchase whose primary driver is the management of external perception is quietly compounding against you, the same way strategic accumulation compounds for you. Except this one produces nothing on the other end. The mechanism that makes ego spending so durable is that it never reaches a stopping point on its own. You cannot satisfy the ego with a purchase because the ego's actual need is not the thing. It is the acknowledgement, and acknowledgement has a very short half-life. Feed it once and the standard rises. The car that proved something last year is neutral this year and slightly embarrassing next year. The costume becomes the floor, and then the floor becomes the cage, and by that point most people have forgotten there was ever a choice involved. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu described a principle that has been applied to military campaigns for 25 centuries and almost never to personal finance, which is a genuine strategic failure. Be extremely subtle, even to the point of formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to the point of soundlessness. Thereby you can be the director of the opponent's fate. Replace the word opponent with the word market and read it again slowly. When your financial position is genuinely unreadable, when no competitor, no social environment, no economic pressure can accurately calculate what you actually hold, you carry every strategic advantage simultaneously. You can move without telegraphing. You can absorb volatility that would collapse someone whose entire identity is staked on a visible financial image. The warrior who announces their full capacity to every room has already handed away the one thing that made them dangerous. Bushido at its core is a doctrine of sequencing, the understanding that a desire satisfied too early is a future position given away before it had time to fully form. The Bushido warrior did not celebrate before the victory was secured, not from cruelty to the self, but from the practical understanding that compound advantage requires uninterrupted time and that every premature reward breaks the chain at exactly the wrong moment. The warrior who holds one more year, who resists the visible upgrade for one more cycle, arrives somewhere that the person burning the same income on performance simply never reaches, no matter how hard they work. Financial freedom is not primarily about money. Follow that idea before dismissing it. What financial freedom actually delivers is freedom from a character you are required to perform. Think carefully about the real cost of maintaining a wealthy image, and do not think about it only in money. Think about it in decisions, in cognitive load, in the morning calculation of which version of yourself needs to show up today based on where you are going and who will see you there. You cannot take the cheaper option when it would break the image. You cannot drive the older car without explaining it. Every day carries a maintenance fee on a persona that was often never authentically yours to begin with. It was constructed for an audience that was never paying as much attention as you assumed. Here is how this actually plays out. Someone builds a business. Revenue grows. They upgrade progressively. The office, the car, the wardrobe, the neighborhood, the class of seat on the flight. Each upgrade felt like a celebration at the time, a marker of progress. But at some point, each of those upgrades becomes a structural floor, a new baseline that requires full income just to sustain. One difficult quarter no longer just stresses the finances. It destabilizes the entire identity that has been built on top of the finances. The fear in that moment is not really about money. It is about who you stop being if the numbers change. Seneca wrote about this exact dynamic in his Letters from a Stoic, specifically in Letter 18, one of the most direct pieces of practical philosophy ever put to paper. His prescription was deliberately confrontational for the wealthy Roman social circle he was embedded in. Set aside certain days to deliberately practice living with the minimum. Cheap food, plain clothing, no pretense of comfort. And in that stripped-down condition, ask yourself honestly, is this really the thing I was afraid of? The exercise is not about enjoying deprivation. It is about discovering that the fear was always larger than the actual reality it was protecting against. The warrior who has already survived the worst version of their circumstances does not make decisions from fear of losing what they have. Their choices come from a genuinely different position, one where strategic clarity is actually possible, rather than the permanent defensive crouch of someone protecting a lifestyle they cannot afford to lose. Seneca's voluntary poverty practice was essentially a reprogramming of how the mind responds to the idea of loss. Confront the thing you are afraid of losing, realize you can survive it, and watch how differently you move through the world when it no longer has that kind of hold over you. The real cost of luxury is never in the invoice. What nobody says clearly enough is that every luxury you acquire creates a new psychological floor, a new minimum you now require just to feel stable. The car you were genuinely proud of 2 years ago now quietly produces a low-level discomfort because the standard moved. The neighborhood you celebrated entering is now the one you are quietly planning to leave. The upgrade cycle has no natural endpoint because the comfort it generates has a half-life measured in weeks, not years. The samurai who mastered the blade lived with very little, not from inability to acquire more, but from understanding that every additional possession serving no functional purpose is weight carried by someone who may need to move fast when the moment arrives. Confucius said something about inner wealth that genuinely unsettled his students when he said it. The superior man is satisfied and composed. The mean man is always full of distress. He was not describing income levels. He was describing orientation, specifically where a person has chosen to anchor their sense of stability. When that anchor is outside yourself, sitting in the crowd's reaction or in whether the right people registered your success, then the stability is permanently at the mercy of things outside your control. Shift the anchor inward, and the whole equation changes in ways that are difficult to explain until you have actually experienced it. The warrior who chases outer display lives in that state of permanent instability, regardless of how impressive the display becomes. Their attention is pointed outward at the audience, at the judgment, at the reflection in other people's reactions. They are not navigating their own financial life so much as managing what their financial life looks like from the outside. These are completely different activities with outcomes that diverge more dramatically with each passing year. The Confucian teaching on humility is often softened into something passive that it was never meant to be. The genuinely humble warrior, in the actual classical sense, is someone who has such a clear and stable sense of their own capacity that external recognition becomes largely irrelevant to their decision-making. Not because they are indifferent to results, but because they do not need the acknowledgement of others to confirm that the results are real. That is a position of enormous practical strength. It means you can build for years in total silence, without a single person validating that what you are doing matters, and the building continues anyway, because your orientation never required their approval to begin with. Here is what this entire journey has been moving toward. The golden armor was never actually yours. You were handed it by a system that needs you to wear it. Because a person who is spending to maintain an image is a person the system can predict, extract from, and keep exactly where it needs them. The car, the brand, the address, the visible markers of arrival. These were costumes issued by a machine that profits from your performance of success, not from your actual success. It does not benefit from your freedom. It benefits from your spending. And the distinction matters more than most people ever allow themselves to sit with long enough to act on. Removing the armor is not a retreat from ambition. It is a strategic redeployment of every resource that was previously being burned on performance. The warrior who makes that shift, who redirects the ego spending toward invisible accumulation, is not choosing to live as though they have less. They are choosing to build at a level that the performance-oriented mind cannot even access, because the performance-oriented mind is perpetually occupied with maintenance instead of construction. This is what separated the samurai who built lasting power from the ones history forgot. Power that is on display can be challenged, targeted, and eventually drained by anyone patient enough to apply sustained pressure. Power that no one can see grows differently, without the friction of social management, without the constant drain of identity maintenance, compounding year after year in conditions that the performance-oriented mind never even thought to look for. The warrior does not look poor because they lack resources. They look poor because they figured out, before almost everyone around them, that the performance of wealth is the single most expensive subscription a person can carry, and the one that pays out the least over a lifetime. Your treasury is not in anything visible. It is in every decision made when the audience was not watching, in every purchase refused when the ego was loud and the strategy was quiet, in every compounding cycle that ran its full course because nobody knew to interrupt it. Walk through the world unnoticed, build in the dark, move when the moment is exactly right. That is the way of the warrior. Stay close to this channel. This kind of ancient, precise, and genuinely applicable wisdom keeps coming. The education of a real warrior does not have a graduation date.